leave them out.
I guess, like, in thinking about all this, like, Americans, like, sort of certainly liberal Americans, have a kind of stereotype about Canada that it is the nice country that we all wish we could live in because people are polite and, you know, there's some kind of a decent healthcare system.
Yeah.
But, like, overall, that's not really the case. I mean, like, Canada is almost as reactionary a shithole as America is, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the American caricature, right, is that because Canada is such a small country, the way that other countries see us is sort of as important to our identity as any kind of like organic identity that we might have. So, you know, a lot of people abroad think of Canada as this sort of post-racial Scandinavia or something like that. And that's kind of what a lot of Canadians think too. You know, our official identity is very much that we're this sort of progressive multicultural utopia.
Your formal multiculturalist policy.
Yeah, there is. There's like state, you know, it is state policy, as is bilingualism. And I mean, you know, I shouldn't, you know, downplay, you know, there are obviously, you know, multiculturalism in Canada, I think, has been more successful than, you know, in many other countries. There are definitely strengths to making it kind of a part of the civic identity. But the flip side is that I think Canadians are not very good at introspecting about, you know, the deficiencies and the problems in their own society. And so it can kind of end up being a sort of, you know, institutionalized complacency.
So it's Trudeau is the incumbent, right? And Trudeau's a guy who came to power after nearly a decade of rule by a right-wing government led by Stephen Harper, who I think you've described as like the angry hockey dad vote. Like that's his constituency, that's who he is and who he represents, right?
Yeah, very much so. So the Conservative Party, I mean, they have a lot of rural support, but, you know, Stephen Harper's majority government in 2011 was kind of won on the backs of suburban voters and, you know, especially the Greater Toronto area. But yeah, the roots of Trudeauism definitely go back to the Harper era. And, you know, in retrospect, looking back at that time, like when the Conservatives, you know, when they'd just been in power for a few years, I was starting university and I kind of saw the birth of the political identity that I think ended up blossoming into Trudeauism, which, you know, again, in retrospect, was kind of our own sort of meeker, more provincial version of what is now the, you know, anti-Trump resistance.
Yeah.
You know, the Harper years, they gave birth to this political identity that was sort of, you know, I guess you could say small p progressive. And it was very shrill and kind of hyperbolic about the Conservative Party. So, you know, I remember all these kind of memes circa 2007, 2008 about like, you know, warning signs of fascism or whatever, that kind of thing. But there wasn't really there. You guys know the type. So, and it was ultimately like very focused on all the norms and the institutions whose dignity the Conservatives were supposedly insulting. It was very into using the language of patriotism, to talking about the Constitution, and all of it really was just about being, you know, anti-conservative. Like ABC, anything but conservative, was, you know, a label that people actually used and which voters actually kind of assigned to themselves. It didn't really have a program attached to it. You know, it wasn't about replacing Harper with anything in particular. It was just about, you know, replacing him, period. So even though its kind of language was progressive, I think ultimately what the people who were attracted to that wanted was a sort of conservative restoration, which is like very much, you know, the case for like a Joe Biden presidency right now.
It sounds a bit like
very analogous to that.
It sounds like a kind of a woke Blairism. It's funny you make that parallel to the sorts of figures we have in the United States, wine moms, epic rant dads, the denizens of the anti-Trump online resistance, and they love Trudeau. They idolize him in the way that they love Macron, because they, you know, whenever Trudeau sits down with Trump, they analyze the footage for evidence of shade that Trudeau is throwing at Trump.
Well, Luke, like I was going to say, like another huge parallel between Trudeau and these types of people, or at least stylistically, is the intense horniness for him among a certain segment of the population. Like, it's just always about like how suave and hot he is, and that plays it's a big part of his appeal, especially like with the contrast with Donald Trump.
You're saying like that appeal is it's mostly like cultural, and just the production of a reaction against Harper, but without any kind of ideological content, just a sort of worshiping of the image. Because at the end of the day, Justin Trudeau is just the fail son of a former prime minister. He's just a celebrity.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things at work here. I mean, I think, one of them is, as you mentioned, kind of the horniness, and like more broadly, Trudeau is just, in some ways the product of like an oversaturated, social media driven and like celebrity obsessive culture. He's the political equivalent. He offers people twee uplift in the way that like something like Upworthy did. If you guys remember that, like awful website. It was like, it's like, Upworthy plus like traditional centrist politics. So that's part of it, right? Like he had viral potential. And, after he got elected, there were headlines, that were things like, Justin Trudeau's 7 secrets to being extraordinarily charming, or, meet the Prime Minister of Canada, our new man crush. These are actual headlines. This was one I liked. Canadian PM Justin Trudeau is really, really ridiculously good looking. And yes, it matters.
So when, as obsessed as you all are with American politics, I mean, Trump meeting Trudeau is obviously a big event. And do you agree with the analysis from our libs that, Justin Trudeau threw some epic shade and made Donald Trump look like a little boy? Is that how you perceive these meetings?
Well, not me personally, but I can tell you that lots of people in Canada absolutely received them that kind of way. Back in 2017, when Trudeau visited the White House, there was this hilarious moment where I guess Trudeau and Trump had some kind of press conference, I guess in the Oval Office or somewhere in the White House. And there's a still image where Trump is holding his outstretched hand. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Trump is holding his outstretched hand and Trudeau is just kind of looking at it.
I can't see Donald Trump's outstretched hand unless I have a microscope.
Right. Yeah, he's orange too. But yeah, so, in the still image, Trudeau is like, looking like he's just kind of, caustically gazing down at Trump's hand and sort of in defiance, not shaking it. But of course, like seconds later, he's just like smiling for the cameras and shaking Trump's hand. So this is like exactly the same as, when Nancy Pelosi epically throws shade by, kind of cryptically, sassily clapping at Trump during the State of the Union address. And then people have to do sort of alchemy and divination to invent ways that this is somehow like a brave act of defiance. That's very much what like, the Trudeau brand as kind of a defier of Trump is about. It's about things like that.
So the big question I have is, we know the Trudeau demographic, both here in the United States and in Canada, what the liberal base is now. Is Trump standing among the epic rant dads and the wine moms hurt or helped by doing blackface for his entire life?
The reactions to that, it's not exactly clear. I mean, I think it's an indictment of, the electorate that it hasn't instantly cut into, the liberal numbers in the polls. It does seem to be hurting Trudeau's personal ratings, right? I mean, it's the ultimate inversion of his brand as the like ultimate performative woke guy.
Yeah.
But I mean, so far it does not. It has as of yet it has not like really hurt his the liberal reelection campaign. And what's amazing is that he's basically trying to run a very similar campaign to the one he ran in 2015, like post blackface. I mean, I guess they're making less of an effort to pretend to be progressive, but they're running, he's still showing up at press conferences like in a canoe, like paddling up to the shore in a canoe and things like that. He's still doing all the same.
But how do they, I mean, how do they resolve this cognitive dissonance? When
very carefully.
Originally,
if I can walk into that one, motherfucker.
Originally, the dissonance was here's the guy who's very performatively woke, and he wears all the costumes, and he feels your pain and all that shit. Pretends to care about indigenous people or the plight of others overseas, while selling arms to Saudi Arabia and trampling over indigenous land rights and so on and so forth. On Ontarians, the what do we call them? The LaCroix Ontarians.
I don't care, dude.
Yeah. I guess that never troubled them, but surely now that it's an image that's maddening to them, like surely that will cause their brains to finally explode. That there's blackface plus woke guy.
It's pretty extraordinary. Like the Trudeau brand does have a remarkable capacity to recover, because it turns out that, I mean, I know it'll surprise you guys, but that a lot of people who talk endlessly about social justice kind of bend on it pretty quickly as soon as their own standards become inconvenient.
Yeah.
So, the sort of media cycle after the scandal broke, he came out and he kind of did an apology, and he said, like, I didn't know that this stuff hurt people. And he was asked by the media, well, did you do it? Did you do it any more than once? And he said, well, there was a time in a high school talent show when I did it. And I also sang Deo. And then they said, and I'm pretty sure at that press conference, he was also asked, well, were there any other times? And he said no. But then the next morning, Global News got a video showing a third instance of him doing it. And, after that, he said, I'm wary of being definitive about this because recent pictures that came out, I had not remembered. And the question is, how can you not remember that?
The thing is, this isn't just. Well, the answer is because he's done it so many times. It's just.
Or the answer is that when it happens, he goes into a fugue state. It's sort of like the Incredible Hulk. And
it's like the woke version of not criminally responsible.
Yeah, he doesn't remember it.
But I'm saying that it's one thing if this is a grainy yearbook photo that came out. This is the son of the former prime minister, and he's in full body blackface. Like,
right, and he was in his 30s, and he was a teacher at the school where this happened. I mean, yeah.
I didn't even know that part.
Absolutely.
I think we've just discovered our first, fracture between American and Canadian politics, because the idea that in America you could be like representing a liberal constituency of a major political party running for the leadership of the country after crassly pretending to be like not another race for most of your life and get away with it is just unthinkable here.
It's not really clear how this didn't come out before, because there were lots of people at these events. I mean, one of the videos is dated from the early 90s, so it goes further back. But all of these things seem to have happened before he got into politics. But it is kind of a wonder that this didn't come out before. And I mean, one of the things about Trudeau's brand is that it's always been treated as sort of too big to fail. Like whenever he's kind of deviated from what his image is on paper, which is like the ultra woke performative guy, everyone just kind of ignores it, right? So like in his big Rolling Stone interview, which I think came out in 2017, something like that, he's talking about this ridiculous charity boxing match that was kind of one of the things that, as absurd as it sounds, kind of elevated him nationally. And he was in politics at this point, and his opponent in that match was this indigenous senator. And he says in the interview, he just straight up says, I wanted someone who would be a good foil, and we stumbled upon the scrappy, tough guy senator from an indigenous community. He fit the bill, and it was a very nice counterpoint. And so he was, raked over the coals by, indigenous activists over that, but it was just kind of ignored, just like it was ignored in the 2015 federal election, when in an interview, he seemed to account for violence against women by blaming rap music. People just sort of always overlooked that kind of thing.
No, so nobody knew about the blackface beforehand when you're telling me he was, this was in the context of a class or a live performance. So theoretically, hundreds of people like just saw him in blackface and forgot about it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Going further into Trudeau, you wrote a very good article in Current Affairs about Trudeau called Justin Trudeau and the Politics of Spectacle. But these parallels emerge again because, he comes into office after, like a decade of a right-wing government. Like he's young, he's good looking, he seems to embody the hopes of a younger generation and a desire to sort of shift course, right? And, exactly like Obama did. And everyone, myself included, like, felt positive at that moment. But then, like, you go into it and, like, right off the bat, like, you talk about, like, what are some of the things he ran on that, again, as soon as he got in office, immediately backed off on?
Yeah, so it was very much like Obama in that a lot of people who thought, who voted liberal thought that they were voting for, like, anti-war, tax the rich kind of government, and needless to say, that's not what they got. I guess Trudeau's political skill, insofar as he had one, was that he was able to kind of adopt progressive language while not really. He wasn't in retro. I mean, as with Obama, right? Like Obama was going around in 2008 praising Ronald Reagan, but none of us kind of noticed or cared. We all thought that he was. We all thought that he was kind of a figure of the left in some way, and Trudeau,
or that he was doing it like to be politically canny and like assuage moderates' instincts, or like about that him as some sort of wild foreign radical or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. It was all part of the 24-dimensional game of chess, which I guess Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer have now taken up. I don't know what move they're on at this point, but yeah. So it was, it was the liberal platform, had all this kind of, I guess, like softly left language around, taxing the rich, doing deficit spending, on around indigenous rights, around climate change. And I mean, if you actually looked into the details, there was nothing particularly radical about it. I mean, they're running to the right of the NDP, definitely. But, Trudeau, kind of ingeniously towed the line. And I think that, Trudeau himself is not a very interesting figure because he's exactly as you see him. He's, a trust fund kid who grew up rich and famous and then, kind of inherited political power largely on the basis of his last name. But the Trudeau phenomenon, I think, is interesting in some ways because at a time when, liberalism was just kind of taking L's everywhere, when, populism, particularly of the right-wing variety, was on the rise all over the world,